This is soldering basics. And the problem is I've been told that soldering is low tech. Then when I teach the class, I realize there's a lot of people that don't know how to solder. But this is one of the basic things that we need to be able to do, especially in cable splicing and insulation. This is one of the primary methods that we use to terminate and also splice conductors, which is the name of the course, right? Cable splicing and insulation. So this is a pre-test. Let's see how many we can get this right. Some of y'all should, because y'all had my solder before. So what does ETA stand for?
Estimated time of arrival. Estimated time of arrival.
That would be true. But that would be like I'm in banking and I ask y'all what does SEC stand for? And what would y'all say? Southeastern Conference. But if I was in banking, SEC would stand for the Security and Exchange Commission, which deals with banking. So these is ETA. So nobody knows what that means. What is soldering in electricity?
Combining two metals.
Sort of.
Bringing two or more metals together at once.
Well, that would be kind of generic. We do that all the time. We have different methods, but we'll look at that. What are the three metals most commonly used in solder?
Tin, copper, not tin,
lead.
lead.
Yeah, y'all both said tin and lead. So, all right, so we're missing one. What is the purpose of flux when you use solder?
To clean the surface, to deoxidize the surface of the
And sometimes we can't really do that, and we'll look at that. What type of flux is used when soldering electronic?
rosin.
Rosin for solder. And flux. And the purpose of the flux is to remove help remove the oxidation off and clean the surface. If you ever did any welding, you understand flux.
Yeah.
Or even brazing. Brazing is very similar to soldering, but it's at a lot higher, hotter temperature, and the metals are a lot stronger. Solder is basically lower temperature. What does the term tinning mean?
Cleaning the tip, or cleaning the tip before you put it back. Tinning.
Tinning wires. What does that mean? What does it mean? Yeah, or tinning means to coat with solder. And what do we tin for? What do we tin for? Yeah, heat exchange. And James, I know you haven't had this yet, but we're going to go over all this. What is the solid and iron range most often used in basic solder, not high picture solder? There's a really good video I'm going to show you, but the guy is soldering 14 gauge wire, and he's using a torch. But I liked it because he showed different ways that we can splice, how we splice conductors together. And so even though he's using a big torch, we're going to do the same thing with a smaller iron.
I'm not sure about that.
25 to 35 watts for most soldering applications. What is the first thing you should do each time you pick up the iron? Clean the tip. So EIA stands for the Electronic Industries Association. And why we bring this up is that most of the standards for soldering was set by ETA. Soldering is joining conductors or conductors to terminals using a third metal that we call what? Solder. The three most popular metals are tin, lead, and silver. And then I don't know about this ratio of solders. So we have what we call the ratio, and the most popular is 60-40. Even though I've seen some people say 63-37, and we'll look at this in a minute. What it is on the left, this is lead, and on the right, this is tin. So this is lead-tin ratio. And then this would be what we call silver solder, which would be 32.36% silver. The purpose of flux is to help remove. I should rephrase that, because if the surface oxidation is too bad, flux will not get it off, and that's where we need to come in and clean it with an eraser. Conductors you're okay with using like a Brillo pad or something like that to clean out conductors. What we see is metals. Most metals, when they're exposed to the atmosphere, they rust. And it forms a coating we call metal oxide. And, most metal oxides are good insulators, except for one metal, and that's silver. Silver oxide is an extremely good conductor. Silver oxide is just as good a conductor as silver. But we don't run into much silver in conductors, right? The two most popular, of course, is aluminum. And we have a problem with aluminum in that you don't like solder. And then copper. Copper really likes solder. Tinning means coating with solder. And we tend to help transfer the heat. 25 to 35 watt iron is the most widely used iron in electronics. When you get into electrical, we get into higher wattage irons, and also, like I said, even torches. And of course, first thing we do is we pick up our iron, we clean it, and then we retin it. So the purpose of soldering, produce a physically strong joint between two conductors and our terminal spliced together with low electrical resistance. So that's the purpose of soldering. Alloy, of course, is the combination of two or more metals to form a third metal, another metal. Soldering is the process. We've already looked at this. Eutectic, this is another term. So eutectic is the ratio of metals that causes the lowest melting temperature of the salt. Of the metals. And there's no plastic state. You have what we call a eutectic alloy. It means when you get it up to a certain temperature, it turns into a liquid. If you drop below that temperature, it turns into a salt. Tin-lead ratio, solder most commonly used in electronics is 60-40, and I have no reason why. The number indicates that it's 60% tin, and that might be backwards. Let's go and look. Yeah, so tin is over here. So so this would be 1090. Okay. So over on this side is lead. Over here is tin. What was strange and surprised me is that tin has a lower melting temperature than lead. It does. So what we're doing is on this side so this side is lead and this side is tin. So this would be 1090. So this would be 10%. So notice this is the tin and this is the lead. So lead is on the left and tin is on the right. So 60-40 would actually be what? 60% lead and 40% tin. So that slide is backwards. Because most people call it the tin-lead ratio, but it actually is the lead-tin ratio, right? Now, when we start making this alloy, when we start making wetting, the process of combining the surface molecules with metal. Let me go back in there, correct that real fast. And of course, all I have to do is come in here and type it in. Got TI, not the number 10, the metal.
It's close there, right?
So, wetting, this is not wetting your bed. Wetting in solder means what we do is this is the process of combining the surface molecules of the metals that we're soldering together with the solder itself. And that's what we do to produce a good joint. So if we don't have wetting, we don't have a good solder joint. We call bad solder joints, technically we call those cold joints. And we'll look at that one. Flux, a chemical that helps remove oxidation from the surface of the conductors. So this is correct. It says helps to. So sometimes if we got so much oxidation on there, we'll have to clean it off using another method. We have two types of flux used in soldering, by the way. We have acid core and we have rosin core. The problem with using acid core is that acid core is constantly, it's always active. Rosin core is only active when you heat it. So when it's not heated, it becomes inert. Another problem we have with acid is that it's a conductor. So acid is a conductor of electricity. So that means if we use acid core solder, we're going to have to, we've got a solder joint that is eventually going to eat itself up over time. Especially if you're soldering on printed circuit boards, because printed circuit boards, the traces are so thin, the eyes are so thin, because we don't want to have very little vertical altitude on a printed circuit board, that those things will eat themselves up. So what we use rosin core or pine rosin. We just say rosin core, and then what that does is it melts at a very, very low temperature. So that means this will spill out first, and then the solder comes second. And we'll look at this. So what we use is what we call a rosin core solder, which means the rosin is actually embedded inside the solder itself. So as soon as we hit that, the rosin comes spilling out. This is another reason why we constantly clean our iron, because if you get rosin on your soldering iron, it's going to be active all the time, and it'll sit there and eat up your tip. So what you do is you just constantly do while I clean it off. So rosin, pine rosin, rosin core solder, or rosin solder. And we have, by the way, we do have some flux that we'll look at that helps you clean the iron. I didn't bring it in on the other class, but I did on this one. Tinning, this is where we coat things with solder to aid in the transfer of heat and bonding, and also it improves the wetting. Slag, these are impurities in the metals that rise to the surface. And basically, you can't get rid of them. If you're in the steel in this industry, you know about slag. So this is a chart of lead-tin ratio. So we have when it's a solid, and then up here it would turn into a liquid, and all this means it would be in a plastic state. Steel has a really good plastic state. And so plastic, in the plastic state, is a lot like Play-Doh, which means, or dough. What can you do with dough? You can work with it and form it. So normally what they do when they make the steel is they just make them in big slabs, and then they turn around and heat it up to a plastic state, and then they form it into whatever they want to do with it. The pipe mill is really neat because they jam a rod down through the center of it and stretch it out, and makes it real long when you put that hot, and that's why they call it seamless pipe. It's not rolled and then welded together like a lot of pipe is. But they can only do that in the plastic state. Well, when we get to this ratio right here, so this is 60-40. So 60-40 has a plastic state, but it's almost no state at all. And then this is 63-37. So 63-37 is referred to as eutectic solder. Eutectic solder, when you get up to 361 degrees, as soon as you get up above 361 degrees, it'll turn into a liquid. As soon as you drop down below 361 degrees, it turns into a solid. And we don't want this thing in a plastic state for a long time, because if you move it while it's in that plastic state, you'll end up with a cold solder. But you'll see this stuff. I mean, 60-40. You'll put your soldering on there and you'll see it turn into a liquid. And then when you cool it down, you can see it turn into a solid. And it has almost no plastic state. And don't ask me why 60-40 is the most popular. I have no idea.
That's the lowest plastic. Besides.
Well, eutectic solder, 63-37. I don't know if 63-37 is hard to make. You can buy eutectic solder. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I really myself can't see advantages to it. Now, what we're doing, guys, is we're using lead. And lead is a carcinogen, or what do they say? Carcinogen. which means it kills brain cells. Yeah, but what you have to understand, the molecules of solder are too big to be absorbed through your skin. So it means lead is safe to handle as long as you don't have any cuts or anything on your hand. What we're going to really avoid is getting solder in our mouth, right? You understand? Or rubbing it on ourselves. So that means we'll wash our hands a lot. We'll make sure we wash our hands when we leave. We're not, this disinfectant don't do anything, but it might kill germs, but it don't kill lead, right? You understand? So we'll wash our hands. Should wash our hands before we start soldering, because if we handle, we're a very oily species. You ever see me if I don't wash my hair for a while? So we're a very oily species. So what we do is normally before we start soldering, we wash our hands. Now this would, the disinfectant's really good at this too, because that's one of the things that disinfectant does is it gets rid of the oil, breaks down the oil. And then we wash our hands. Make sure we wash our hands every day before we leave, right? We're not going to eat. We're not going to drink around the solder. This is not for drinking, by the way. This is for our sponges. We don't drink while we're soldering. We don't, because if I handle the bottle, I get lead on there, and then I get it up there on my mouth, and avoid like picking your nose and that kind of stuff too, or wiping your eyes while you're soldering. So this is flux. Some of these I've never seen before, but what they do is we buy what we call flux core solder, and this is the most popular. This is what I use all the time. And what they do is they put that flux inside a tube that's inside the solder. And as soon as my iron hits that and opens up that little tube, which is going to be instantly, the flux comes out instantly because it has an extremely low melting temperature. It comes out just like a liquid. And it spills out across the surface. It's nice and hot, so it comes up and starts eating up the surface oxidation right off the metal oxide right off the bat. And then the solder comes bleeding out, and then it spreads out. If we got enough heat on the metals, which is a technique that a lot of people has problems with. So we don't use the soldering iron to solder. We use the soldering iron to provide the heat. What actually does the soldering is the metals that you're soldering together. So what we'll do is we'll place our soldering iron there, and we'll always end up soldering on the opposite side. These are different types of soldering. We have a soldering gun. These guys are about 100, 110 watts, so we don't use these guys to solder small wires. We use these guys to solder big conductors with plastic. And the best solder gun, by the way, is made by called Wheeler. That makes extremely good solder. Yeah, you can, but when you hit these guys, you don't need really adjustable. What they are, normally they have two temperature wattage ratings on, and one of them will be a lower wattage rating, and one of them will be a high wattage rating. So this is 100 and 140 watts for this guy. So what you got on just about all these things is you got a two-position switch. As soon as my camera gets and it didn't work. Let me see if I can get it working with this guy. Now that's why it won't work, because this guy's still got it. So this is a soldering iron. This is a soldering gun. And the biggest problem you have, guys, is these right here, because you're heating your iron up, heating this thing up, and then these guys get loose, and as soon as they get loose, the tip won't get hot anymore. This is a copper tip. And of course, the problem with a copper tip is that it's going to oxidize on you. It will eventually eat it up. They do have what they call ironclad tips, which are basically a copper with a real thin plating of iron. And what's nice about those is those things will last forever, but they don't transfer the heat as good. And you see, this guy's been tin. What's nice about most of these, they have a light on the front of it that aids you in seeing how to solder. But if I was going to do like 14 gauge wire, or something like that, then I would use one of these guys, or use a soldering torch. And then we have different irons depending on our wattage. So this is a Wheeler iron. This is a 35 watt, which is my preferred gauge. Most of the time, though, guys, these tips are replaceable, or not only replaceable, they're also changeable, which means, so we call this this is a soldering iron, but technically we should be referred to as a soldering pencil, because we treat it like a pencil. So it's got a grip on here that don't slide real easy, and then we solder like this. We never solder down here. And of course, these guys get extremely hot. What's nice about the soldering gun is that when you let it go, the tip's going to cool down. You just got to be cognitive of it for a small amount of time. These guys right here, these guys are going to stay plugged in most of the time. The heating element is up in here. This right here, you see, this tip is replaceable. So we can come in and we can get different tips for this iron. But one of the first thing you should do is you should make sure this is tight, finger tight, as tight as you can get with your fingers. Don't get anything else on it. You can see somebody else has got something on this one and actually tried to break it through. So this guy here stays extremely hot all the time. So what we do is we have what we call a soldering stand. Notice it's got the spring out here, and then it's got a method here that absorbs the heat. Now this is going to get warm, but it's not going to get warm enough to burn you. So if you touch it, you're going to know you're touching it, but it's not going to burn you. If you burn this guy, if you hit this guy right here, guys, it's going to get you just like that. Take your skin. So this is one we got from, this is a 25 watt iron. Now the wattage of the iron determines how hot the tip gets. But you got to understand, as soon as you get up to 361 degrees, the solder's going to melt. But we want to get higher than that, because once we get this thing up against the metal, then what's going to happen is that metal is going to sink the heat away, right? You understand that? So usually we get up to around 600 degrees. A 35 watt iron would just solder a little faster. He wouldn't sink out at that. But if you leave it on there long, you got to be fast with these guys. You don't want to leave the iron, especially on a printed circuit board, because if you got thermoplastic insulation, if you get it too hot, it's going to turn soft, right? You understand? It'll come right out of the wire. If you got thermoset insulation, then you're going to end up, you get it too hot, and it's going to become very brittle, right? You understand that? So we're not going to stay on there real long. We're going to show you how to do this.
I think it's for an eye right out.
Huh?
Right.
Yeah, if you leave that, those soldering irons, those printed circuit boards, that copper path on there is just held on there by glue. And the problem with most glues, when you heat them up, they turn back into liquids again, and the solder iron comes off. You got to be really fast on it. So these are just different types of tips. What tips you use, guys, are basically just it's what you like. You need to have a tip that's got a tip big enough on it to cover or get into what you're going to solder. I don't like these pyramid tips. I don't like these at all. I like these semi-chiseled tips. This is just what I like. So it's just you get these angle tips, which basically you set the iron at a different angle, and this is just a preference what you want to do. And you get these things in pretty high wattage. The planes I worked in the Navy, they were turboprop, which means they're jet engines, but the jet engines turn propellers. And so on propellers, you get up, these planes don't fly low. These guys get up over 30,000 feet. So we had to prop de-icing. So the props had the icing heaters on it. And the way you transferred the heater, the power to the heaters was through what we call slip rings. A slip ring is basically a round ring of copper, and then you use a carbon brush that rides against that and transfer power with something that's in motion. And we had to repair those brushes. And the soldering iron that we used, I don't know what that thing was, but it was huge. Because those slip rings, those brushes were really, really big. So we'd come in, and every once in a while we'd go out there and pull off those assemblies that had all the brushes in them, and they had, good gracious. So it's 3-phase. The heaters were 3-phase, and they had probably 8 brushes per ring. Pretty important. So they had turned those things up when they got up above a certain altitude to keep the props from icing up. It's a P-3 Orion, which was in the Navy. Well, it is. It's an ASW is what it is, anti-submarine warfare. But they use it a lot. A lot of the planes they fly into the hurricanes, they've been modified over to fly into that. You'll see a P-3 used a lot. One thing they like about it is it's got observation windows on it, and they're actually bubbles, so you can actually stick out and look around. So and those worked out real well when they was designing the planes, and the Navy asked for that. Lockheed was leery of it, but it turned out to be working out great. And they were plexiglass too, which is pretty. But yeah, so the side windows were bubbles. This is the correct soldering technique. Now they've left off one step. So what we got when we clean our soldering iron is we got 2 methods. And I usually make both of them. We have a sponge that we moisten. And you don't want to use a synthetic sponge. You want to use a natural sponge because synthetic sponges are made out of plastic and they'll melt. And then we soak this with water, and notice these soldering stands have a little trough in it for your sponge. So we'll come in here and we'll just take these and we'll soak them with water. We get the soldering out. This is not hot now, boy. And then we'll soak these with water. And then what we do, every time we'll pick up our iron, we come out and then we just wipe it off, and then we re-tin it. That's what do we tin for? Well, the problem we have is that we're trying to get maximum transfer between 2 metals, and these metals are going to be have all types of grooves and pits in them. So the surface that if I was to blow the surface up of the metal I'm trying to solder to, it's going to look like that. And here comes my soldering iron down here, and what's it going to do? It's only going to touch at a few spots. Well, what would happen is that would be the only place you're going to transfer heat to. So what we do is we come up here and we tin the iron. So now the iron, now the soldering iron has a coating of molten metal on it. So what happens when I bring that in, that tin on that iron does what? Fills in the gap, and now we get maximum heat transfer between my soldering iron and what I'm trying to solder. Okay. So first thing we do is what? Every time you pick it, and sometimes you have to clean it while you're using it. So monitor your surface oxidation. And of course the slag will come up and this will turn gray, right? And all you need to do is just come back and do what? Just clean it off again and then re-tin it. So this slide right here, left out the re-tinning portion. So the first thing we do is come up in what? We pick it up off the iron, we clean it off with our sponge, then we do what? Then we re-tin it. And then we come in, and what we're going to do is we're going to touch the iron, and the iron has to touch both metals that you're soldering together. Everybody understand that? And we got tin on there, so what's going to happen is that tin is going to come in and it's going to fill this gap in. And then we're going to come up and we're going to solder opposite of the iron. So the only way you're going to get a good soldering joint if the metals that you're soldering together melt the solder. Now, if I come over here and touch right here and nothing happens, then what I'll do is I'll bring my solder and I'll put a little touch of solder right here. And then I'll move over to the other side. So always end up soldering on the side opposite of where you're soldering. And if you go down there and you put that solder down there and it don't hit instantly, touch right there. If that don't do it, then take that iron off there, because what's going to happen is you're going to get everything too hot, right? You understand? And it's going to screw up the insulation on your wire, because that heat is going to wick up, it's going to sink up that wire into your insulation. So don't leave. If things don't happen, don't keep that iron on there. Pull it off, clean it off, re-tin it, and try it again, right? You understand? Because what happens if you leave the iron on there, you're going to give time for that heat to transfer up that wire, and it's going to screw up your insulation. And good soldering joint, by the way, and this is going to be true, this is called a fillet. And a fillet is where we can actually see where the solder merges with the surface of the metals. So if I come over here and put a big old glob of solder on here, I can't see the merging of if I can't see the merging of my solder with the surface molecules of the metals, I take for granted it's a bad joint, because I don't know, right? If I can see that merging with the metals, if I can see this thing we call the fillet, then I know that I've got a good solder. So if you put too much solder on there, and this is the biggest tendency of everybody, or not everybody, most people when they're learning the solder, they put too much dang solder on there. They create a big old blob of solder, and I take for granted right off the bat, it might be a good joint, but what? I don't know. And if you don't know it's a good joint, you assume it's bad. Everybody okay? So bad solder joints, if you see it dip into the conductor, that's a bad joint. If you see it bubble out, we assume that's what? A bad joint. Everybody understand that? And this solder back. Soldering, preparing the conductor for splicing and termination. So the techniques I'm going to show y'all, sometimes we use, and what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to do stranded wire. And the problem we have with stranded wire, and why we like to do this, is some of these things we don't have to do if it's solid strand. The problem we have with stranded wire is that it wants to do what we call birdcage, which means what? It won't spread out. So what we do with stranded wire before we terminate it, using some of these methods, is we tin the wire. So what we do is, of course, conductor tolerances, the wire must be properly stripped and tinned. Wash your hands before touching bare wire, right? Of course, now we can go out and use cloth. We can use the sanitizer. Avoid touching the exposed conductor when not necessary. After stripping, the maximum number of damaged strands conductor is given on the next slide. After tinning, the wetting of the tinned wire must penetrate the inner strand. Wicking of solder under the insulation should be avoided. Now understand wicking. So wicking means we have certain materials, when you expose them to certain things, it automatically pulls it into it. And anybody that's a candle wick is a perfect example. So that you're burning that wax, but the wax is not in the string most of the time. Sometimes I've seen candles you could actually pull it out of. Real good candles, they'll tin it or dip the wick in wax before they put the wax on there. And what that does is that string, when that wax turns into a liquid, it does what? Into that cloth, it literally does what? Just wicks. We call that wicking, where you have two items. When you mix them, when you have a liquid and something, then it will wick. Well, what's going to happen with your solder, when your solder turns into a liquid, it'll wick into those wires. Because copper loves solder. Copper and solder gets along really, really well. but wicks in there. Well, the problem is if you get the solder too close to the insulation, it's going to wick up under the insulation. And now you got that melted metal that's going up under your insulation, and that could give you problems later on, right? Wires shall be strain relief and must provide a slight loop to avoid at least one field repair. Normal tendency is 2. You want to leave a loop. For one thing, people don't understand this, but things move. So when we run cables and stuff like that, we always leave slack in the cables because this building right here expands and this building right here retracts. I like A building over there because you can actually see the expansion joints in that building. So if you're going through building A, like on the bottom of the floor, every once in a while you'll see a metal thing that goes all the way around. And if you took that thing up, you're going to see a little trough in there where they gave room for the whole building to do what? Expand and contract. And we run into this all the time with older concretes. Now they have, this is why we put rebar in concrete, right, and different types of things to help prevent that expansion and retraction. So we need to have at least enough slack at where we terminate the wire to provide at least one field repair. Or you walk into some networking stations and they'll have a loop out there.
Really?
Yeah. Once soldered, the exposed conductor must not short to adjacent conductors or terminals. This also bothers me where people, and I treat this in my electronics classes all the time. In electronics, we use a thing called a breadboard. And the wires that you get you strip them off, and they'll strip off 3 inches of wire and plug it into that board, and they leave all that exposed wire up there. And like I tell my students, you can't control the length of exposed wire on your components, but you can definitely control the length of wire on the wires that y'all strip, right? Once soldered, the exposed conductors must not short to adjacent conductors and terminals. The wire insulation must be within 2 wire diameters of the solder joint, but not touching the solder. Now, we're not talking about the diameter of the conductor with the insulator. We're talking about the diameter of the wire. Huh? 2. So that means when I come up here and I do some soldering, and what I'll do is when I come up here, first of all, we're going to have to strip it. And I think I left my strip. Maybe one of those strips. One of the long one with the strippers on the outside. We got another roll. I think it carried over there. We got 2 gauges of wires. But, and we've got when we strip this, number one, and this is later on too, is that what we have on the strippers is we have different gauges. And what you want to make sure you use is you use the right gauge wire for what you're stripping. People have a tendency to make it real easy. And you'll see people come up here and they'll come in here and they'll stick that up and they'll do this. We don't want to do that. We can avoid that, right? Because as soon as you scribe that wire, then what happens is if you scribe the wire, then what's going to happen is you're going to lose. So I come over here, I take that, I want to make it real easy. And if I come over here and scribe the wire, then the wires are going to break, right? You understand? So wire is not easy to strip. You'll see some of the videos that I put together. Then what we normally do is if we got real clean hands, what we'll do is, of course, we'll come up and twist it together. But what we're going to do is once it's twisted together and then you solder something, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and see if this insulation is between, see I clipped the wire right there because I used the wrong side. But I stripped that strand, we call it strand. I'm going to come up here and so there's the wire diameter right there. You understand that? So when we come in here and do these soldering and we do, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we would splice the wire with solder and how we would terminate the wire. this 2 wire diameters comes in really, really critical in termination. Because termination means you're bringing that wire to an end, right? Understand? People have a tendency when they put that thing on the terminal is to leave too much exposed wire out there, and then we got all kind of problems. So when we get into splicing is going to be a little different in that we'll probably have to use a lot of exposed conductor, but then we'll come on and we'll cover this up. With either electrical tape, or we're going to use heat shrink. Heat shrink is the best thing you can buy to cover up a wire that's been spliced. Heat shrink is what we'll use. You could use electrical tape. Electrical tape is fine, but the problem we have if electrical tape gets into really harsh environments, the glue on there could give you problems. If you heat it up, then it could turn loose. So electrical tape is great. I've used it a lot. But the preferred method is to use something called heat shrink. And like I said, you can buy the heat shrink at Lowe's. The heat shrink that we've got is black. So this is heat shrink. This is not the right gauge, but we'll look at it in a minute. And how you shrink it down. And we usually use a heat shrink gun. Don't like to touch it with my soldering iron, even though I've seen people do that. If you use a soldering iron, you want to shrink it with this up in here. You don't want to get down here because this has got solder on it. If you touch it with this, then that solder is going to get off on your heat shrink. And you don't want to let this touch the heat shrink. The heat shrink is probably more thermal set, so it gets real brittle if you touch it against the actual source of your heat. So normally what we use is we use what we call a heat shrink gun, or what we got is we ordered heat shrink guns, but when they sent them, they were paint strippers. So if you ever been into painting, latex paint, you can strip latex by it's a rubberized paint anyway, right? Anybody that's painted with it understands that. So one method you can strip it is to get a heat gun and just spray it on there, and that stuff will just wipe off there. It's really, really cool because of the latex. But don't leave it on there too long because you could cause a fire. But if you shrink it with your and we'll heat this up in a minute and show y'all heat shrink. Heat shrink is a special plastic that when you heat it up, it shrinks down to about 1/3 its size. So that means it's big, and you can slide it over there, and then you come up and heat it up. It's going to shrink down across your splices. And so one of the things that we do in electrical is that in residential wiring we've only got 4 colors to work with. What's the 4 colors for wires we have in residential wiring?
Black
and red. So a lot of times, and then each one of them has a different function in life. And so when I'm trying to run things like a 3-way switch or something, a switch where I can turn it on different ways, what you have to do is you have to re-identify one of your wires. You can use a white wire as another color, but you have to re-identify it as that color. Does that make sense? The problem is that I've seen people use magic markers. That's okay as long as they're permanent. That's one method. That's legal. But the best way is to go to Lowe's and just get you a piece of red. You only have to re-identify it in the junction boxes, because you don't re-identify it because it's inside a cable. But anytime it comes into a box, if you use that white wire for something besides neutral, you can do that. It's just that you're supposed to do what? You're supposed to re-identify it, which means you can get a red or black permanent marker and do it that way, or you can get black heat shrink and put it over there and shrink it down, and that's in my opinion. Or even black tape, supposedly is legal. So we got a little head on that, but that's okay. Oh, I didn't want to exit that.
That was the question that I seen on this we didn't have like the 2 wires, two wire distance.
Oh yeah, but we wasn't doing termination in that. So what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with conductors. The troubleshooting class, we were just building circuit boards. So if you looked at the wires on that, they were already pre-tinned for you. So we don't want to, nicking strands, we call that scribing. Anytime we nick a metal, solid metal, it breaks real easy. I think the other day we talked about scribing glass, how we can do that. And then of course losing a strand. So this is rules right here. So if you got 7 or less strands, so a single strand wire, you cannot nick that wire and you definitely can't cut it, right? Well, you're going to have to cut it, but past the length. But these are nicks. Damaged strands. Single strand from 0 to 7, you can't mess those wires up. 7 to 15 strands, you could have 1, 16 to 18, 2. And the problem with stranded wire is that the number of strands sets the gauge of the wire. If you start clipping strands, then what do? Change the gauge of the wire. If you change the gauge of the wire, what do you just change? The ampacity of the wire. Right? You understand that? So what we do sometimes, not all the time, but we have different splicing techniques that basically deal with solid strand wire. Well, what we can do to use stranded wire in these situations is we can coat them with a little bit of solder, and then they become a solid wire. So I've seen people put stranded wires under screw terminals, but they don't put the stranded wire on there. What do? They tin it. So some of the techniques that we're going to look at splicing is going to be using a tinned wire. So what we do, first of all, stripping. What's stripping? Removing the outer part would be including the insulator. If the cable's got a jacket, it would also be removing the jacket, right? Y'all understand the difference between the insulator and the jacket now, right? No, insulator keeps in the push. The jacket protects against the environment. And like we said, sometimes they can be included together. Sometimes they're not. Like in house wiring, if you ever get in house wiring, we use a type of wire that most people call Romex. And why they call it Romex is that's the company that originally developed that wire. And it's got a jacket. It's got 2 jackets. It's got the jacket that surrounds the cable. We have 3 wires running through Romex. And then it's got a jacket around the insulator, around the conductors. So it has 2 jackets on there. So we have a stripper. So this is one of the strippers. These are the cheaper ones. I need to find mine. I got a set like this. They're really neat. What's nice about these is when they strip, they also pull off, but when they strip, you'll watch them, they'll come down at an angle. So they'll come down at an angle. So when they hit the wire, if they do hit the wire, they're gonna not scribe it, they're gonna put a little dent in it. And the dents don't change the physical strength of the wire that much. But these guys right here, if you don't use the right gauge, then what happens with these guys, if you crimp down and you don't use the right gauge, then you're going to scribe the wire. Yeah, but they don't strip at an angle. If you come in here, that's what I'm saying. So you come up here and you originally close these things down. If you look at the blades on there, the blades themselves are actually straight. I mean, so you're talking about the scissors are angled, but if you actually look what's cutting, it's a vertical cut, right? So if we come in here and look at this, this side right here is actually what's cutting, and this is straight, and this right here is straight. The only reason they're angled is so we can put a sharp tip on there. So we can have a lot of support back in here, right? You understand? And then bring it out to a little tip out here that has probably the least amount of support. So what this means, if I come in here and have a solid strand wire, and I choose the wrong gauge, and I clip this down here, we're going to scribe it. And as soon as I scribe it, what's going to happen? Well, no, it's not. That's the problem. It's not going to break. You got a scribe in there. It's just like I got a piece of glass and I take my glass cutting tool and I scribe it. Does it break? No, it don't break until you put it under a force. So the problem we have with conductors is they're constantly under forces. You put these inside equipment, the equipment's expanding and contracting, everything's heating up, cooling down, heating up, cooling down. So that's when the wire breaks. It don't break. If you scribe it, it don't break when you install it. It breaks when? Later on. And I've seen this happen all the time in electric wiring. You see some electricians or novice, they'll get their knife out and they'll put their finger on there and they'll rub that thing off and pull it off. They scribe it and then they stick it down inside there or put it under a screw. And sooner or later that outlet's going to stop working. You go in there and the wire's what? I see this in these trainers all the time where kids scribe those wires and they'll stick in that trainer and break it off, and now that piece of wire is down inside there. And we have to get something and dig it out because it's down in there. Why did it break? It didn't break when they stripped it. It braked over time, or when they started jiggling that thing to get their meter leads in there, and they jiggle a little bit, and then it broke.
For the Cat 5K cable, or communication cable, those go a little bit further with that, bring it down. I was there. But I'll go ahead and cut it, go ahead and bring it down, and then install wire for rubberized.
Don't undo the twist, right? Very little. We'll talk about that too. We're going to learn how to terminate Cat, or we're going to learn how to do an Ethernet termination. That's one of the things. That's when we get into our crimp and our punch sounds. What we're doing here, though, is we're basically just dealing with how do we solder. Then after this, we'll look at that. One of the chapters in the book gets all what we call the crimp type connectors or the splices, and we'll look at that. So you'll get the first lab we'll do, of course, is going to be soldering. And that'll be what we'll do at the end of the class. All right, guys, y'all take a break. I left this thing recording. I do that all the time.
We didn't say anything bad.
Y'all was outside anyway. This is the only stripper they allow you to use in the military. When I was there, I don't know what they do now. This is the stripper we was looking at. You can get the cheaper versions of these. I think they sell them at Lowe's. This is all metal. And if you notice, what happens is when it comes in and starts stripping, everything starts moving forward. So what happens is it comes in, it not only pulls your insulation off for you, it also strips, puts a dimple in it instead of a scribe. But it's pretty important that you select the right gauge. See, it pulls your insulation off for you. Then that'll be the strip wire. This is one way we make stranded wire, by the way. Most of the pictures you see about stranded wire, is it's in a spiral. We don't get that until we get into bigger gauge wires. Most of your smaller wires, the strands are just straight. You don't see that? This is a solid strand wire that I'm going to strip on purpose. So I'll strip it with this, and I'm going to strip off enough so I can demonstrate this. So I don't have my pocket knife with me. So all I'm going to do is just going to simulate a scribe. I'm going to come over here and just down here. I'm just going to take this and scribe it. And then I'm going to come over here and start bending it. See, when I come up here and strip it correctly with the right gauge, and I don't let my stripper touch the wire, I let the right gauge through. And then I come up here and start bending it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Usually breaks on 9. But this is a pretty small gauge wire. The heavier gauge wire you can get into, like house wiring, if you scribe that, it's going to break real fast. So if you do have to strip a solid strand wire or any wire with a knife, the technique for stripping it is to see what can y'all see what I'm doing? I'm doing it at a what? Angle. Now, then we're just coming in and do it like that. So now if I touch the wire, all I'm doing is what? I'm putting a dimple into it instead of putting a scribe. So you can see electricians do that. They'll come in and, so if you ever see an electrician come up and do this and strip that wire, they work for you at Fire. No, I'd give them a little lecture. Hopefully they hadn't been working for me for a real long time and wired up 15 houses already. So it's okay to strip with a knife, but make sure you strip it at a what? Angle. For some reason, I'm closing out the PowerPoint. The technique we would like to use, and it's real hard to do, guys, is what we'd like to do when we strip the wire. If it's stranded wire, what we would like to do is we'd like to strip it like this. And I'm going to attempt to do this, but if you can. If you got real good hands, clean hands, it's not going to hurt you. What we would like to do is we'd like to come up here, choose the right gauge, right? Come in and we'll choose the right gauge. And what we'd like to do is pull it just a little bit like that. Notice I've got the gap right here. And then what we'd like to do is we'd like to start turning the insulation while we're pulling it off. Or try to. And what we would like to do that for is what we do is we'd like to twist it together with our fingers with the insulation instead of doing what? With our hands. But you'll be okay as long as you do what? As long as you have your hands are clean and oil free. Are you okay? So that's what that slide was saying. So that's what it's recommended, but like I said, it's hard to do. So acceptable, we don't want frayed insulation. We want a nice clean cut, right? You understand? But we don't want the wires scribed. Everybody understand that? And wire is not easy to strip. If it's real easy for you to strip that wire, it means odds are you're using a gauge too small, a size too small. This is called bird caging. Bird caging, we don't have that problem with solid strand wire. We do have it with stranded wire. This is the separation of the wires, right? And like I said, if it's straight stranded, then one of the first things you're going to do after you strip it is to do what? It's just to spin that thing down tight, right? So you see people, if you see it's real easy to strip, then odds are you're using the wrong gauge. So I'll come in here, and when I strip this, notice what I'm doing. I'm getting a real good grip on that wire, and then I'm stripping it. And I would like to pull it off and then spin it like this, right? But like I said, if you can't, if it comes off, if your hands are free of oil, which mine are, just wash them. Then we can go ahead and strip it out like that. Are we okay? All right. This is the wire stripper we was talking about, and I think what this says, it says do what? The first thing you need to do is choose the right gauge. Now this is the gauge of the conductor, not the size of gauge of the wire, not the size of the insulation, right? So notice the gauges are marked real well on the tip right there. Are we okay? Okay there? This is, no it don't. Yeah, I know you bring that up every time, but I just ignore you, right? It does have millimeters on one side, and then this is the AWG wire gauge right there. And this would show you the stripping, right? This is, I think on this one we're going to strip it all the way off. But you watch, it's not easy to get the insulation off there. You're going to have to really hold that wire to get it off if you're going to use the right gauge. So here we're using the right gauge. And it's hard, my camera was over above me, so it was hard to get off there. But you see I had to wrap the wire and pull it off there. And we don't want to see much of this, even though I do it on the next slide. You need to just ignore that. So if we can do it this way, if it pulls off, don't re-strip it. Just make sure your hand's clean and twist it with your hand. If you can do it with the insulator, that's the preferred method. So don't do this. Try not to do this. So we don't like to spin it like that, right? Don't do that. But it's stripped okay. And then if we can do this, we'd like to pull it off and leave it. Don't leave a space and then come in and do twist insulation. But like I said, if it pulls off, don't re-strip the wire. Just go ahead and make sure your hand's clean and do it that way. Are we okay? This is tinning. Clean the iron tip, tin the iron tip, solder on the opposite side of the iron. Start at the insulation or close to the insulation. You don't want to be right up against the insulation. And what we do is we move the iron and the tip together. So watch this. Oops. Let me go back to this one. I've done that twice. This one. So we don't want to get right up against the insulation. If we get right up against the insulation, then we might have, so tin the iron, right? Come in, put it, now notice, and then do what? I tinned it again. And then watch this. See that real smooth motion? What we want to do, guys, I don't know if y'all can see this or not, but we do that. What's that going to do is the wire is going to wick the solder, so the solder goes all the way into the inner strand. We don't want it just on the outside. We want it to wick through the wire. And I don't know if y'all can see this, guys, but I can still see the strand. So this is what we call wetting, seeing the wetting. So what we're looking for is that this is the wire. This is the wire. I don't know what's going on. Well, I'm on the video. If this is the wire, then what we're looking for is we're looking for that solder to come up and do this. So what we can actually do is we can see the solder actually merge with the surface of the wires themselves. If we put too much solder on there, so if you come up here and cover that up and all I see is that, I can't see wetting. I can't see where it's wicked all the way through the wire. I cannot see that it's mixed with the surface molecules of the solder, and I cannot tell if it's a good joint. If you can't tell it's a good joint, we assume it's what? Yeah. So this is another example right here. So this is a little better view because I have my camera angle. I have my solder beam. See that? Everybody okay there? So we have these things here, we call these third hand. And what this gives us the ability to do is we can come up here and we can we should have enough here for y'all. So what we can do is normally when we do this, you should have seen some of the things I've done without the third hand to try to get this. Because you got to have enough space to get the iron under the. And so what we do is, I don't know if my tip of my iron is heated up. These guys are nice to do this because you're not handling your solder as much. So the only thing you're going to be handling your solder is usually these two fingers right here, and then you can do what you're not handling it much. But make sure when you do this, you handle the solder. Then what are you going to do? You're going to make sure you wash your hands, right? So the first thing I did, I pick up my iron, I'm going to clean it. Then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do what? Pin it. Not quite ready to pin it. But you can see the iron. When you do it right, see the shiny tip on the end? Well, that's the solder. You always leave a coating of solder. So the last thing you do before you put your iron up, before you turn it off, is you re-tin it and leave it that way. And the tip will last a real long time. Plus, you should solder in a well-ventilated area, so this is a really good area if you want to avoid inhaling that, even though it's nothing but flux. It's just pine rosin. And then what we'll do is, I got a little coat of solder on here. My hands are clean. Then I'll come up here, and then I'm going to clean this. Okay, I'm just going to do what? One smooth motion. Once it starts. And that's the 10 wire. Now what you'll see when I pass this around, I could have went a little closer to the insulation, but that you can still see the strands. And you can see wet. We don't want the solder to wick up under the insulation because that will be melted metal, right? And it'll be very, you'll lose a lot of flexibility of the cable back up here. Now, while we do this, now that we've got the thing tinned, now the tip of the wire is like a solid strand wire. So what I can do now is I can do with my stranded conductor what I would do with a solid conductor, right? And of course, this would be, I see it blobbed up on there, so acceptable. You still see the watt, you still see the strands. So that way, you can see the wetting, you can see where the solder is merged with individual strands of the stranded cable. We don't want blobs of solder, right? We don't want to burn our insulator up here. If you leave it on there too long, guys, trying to get it to do it, you need to just get off of it, right? Because what's going to happen is you're going to melt your, if it's, like I said, if it's thermal set, then this right here is going to turn black and it's going to be really brittle. If it's thermal plastic, it's going to be real soft. And then the wire actually will come out of the insulation. So this is solder splicing. We have different methods we can splice. We have solder splicing. We usually use this. We can do this with solid strand wire. Sometimes, well, it's not about solid strand wire. A lot of times you can just twist it together. So this is a NASA standard. This is really called, some people call this the Western Union standard. This is a method, this is probably the best method of splicing conductors. If it's stranded though, what are you going to have to do before you use this method? You're going to have to tin the wire. Everybody understand that? So can y'all see how this works? So what would we do? We come up here, we overlap them, and then we start on this side, then we do this side, or vice versa. It says pretend the conductors if they're stranded. If they're solid, you don't have to pretend them. So if they're stranded, you need at least how many turns over here on each side? At least what? 3. We want them tight with what? No gaps. We don't want them to overlap. We want the end to be flush. We don't want it to stick out. What's that? My printer? Okay. No insulation overlap. Soldering shell wet, all wet. We know what wetting is now, so we know that's submerging of the solder. Wet all elements in the connection. Solder shell fillet. I understand the fillet, so we can see this is the little fillet right there, where we can actually see the merging of the solder with the metals. Solder shell fillet between the elements over the complete periphery of the connection. And this is NASA's. This is a national standard, but originally it was developed by Western Union to splice their telecom wires. And this guy here is so good that it wasn't until later on that they started soldering it. So originally it was just solid strand wire that they wrapped together like this. It's pretty good. Then we have what we call the rat tail. I like to use this one because it's real easy. Where you just cross them in an X and then just do twist them together. And then you come back and solder this. The only problem you have with this is that you end up with it. What I usually do is I just take it and bend it over across the insulation and then either tape it up or put heat shrink on it. This is called a T-joint. We do this a lot. I just had this problem. I got a trailer that I pull behind, and over time, all my lights have got lenses are busted out of them. If you ever pull the trailer, so that's what happens. So I just put a new trailer kit on mine, and I put some side running lights on them, and I had to tap off. Well, I did a T, right? Y'all see how this works? So basically, we just come in and do what? By the way, this is a technique called penciling. This is what you would get if you used a knife. This is not really that necessarily. When we get into high voltage cables, we don't strip them flush like this. We pencil them, because what you want to do is you don't want all that energy to be end at a straight line. You want it to go down, right? You understand what I'm saying? So on high voltage wires, very seldom do we just cut them straight. We usually pencil them like this to equalize the stress instead of trying to put it all on one. This is, I don't know what you call this, a weave, I guess you would call it. What's nice about this one, and what's nice about this one, is you end up with a very small radius or diameter here on the connection. This right here, this works with stranded wire. This has to be stranded wire. We don't do this with solid wire. Is what we do is we fan out the strands, we merge them together, and then we do what? Then we twist them, and we end up with a joint that's just a little bit bigger than the actual original joint. So this is a real popular way too. It's just a little harder to do. And those are the main methods of doing this. So what we would do, instead of me tinning all these wires, we'll do it with a solid wire. In fact, let's see if I can find that video. And basically, we can do the same thing with a stranded wire if we do with it first. If we tin it. I think I didn't merge this one into the PowerPoint. So this guy's going to use 14 gauge wire, solid strand wire. And he's going to use a torch to solder it and not a soldering iron if I've got it. I mean, I don't know. I did this at home, so. I don't see any videos up here, right? PowerPoint. Undoubtedly, like I just said, I did it on my computer at home. This is fiber optic, that's fiber optic. So I don't have video. So we'll just, or I don't see the video. This might be. No, in fact it crashed. Yeah, yeah, I figured it would. That's probably all there is. It's only, we'll look for it on YouTube quick, because it was a YouTube video that I downloaded. It's a splicer. I'll give you. Yeah, it says splicing. But they understood what I said, what I mean. That's one thing about it. I think this is the one. Hey, Okay, here we would like to. He's doing it on the top. What we do is we put the iron on the bottom because what happens to heat? Yeah, heat rises, right? You understand? So it's a little easier to heat up your wire faster if you put the soldering iron on the bottom, and then you know for a fact that your iron is at. I mean, the wires are actually melting solid. He has put something, but you can still see the strand. Look at see and demonstrate the weave. Uh, so we would come up here and do what on the weave? Let me find my wire. Yeah, so this wire works out real well because it's not twisted. If you get into a little bigger gauge, it's going to be twisted, and what you have to do the weave, you'll have to untwist it, right? So this wire right here is not twisted together, so we should be able to do the weave pretty good. So we'll cut off probably about a half inch using the right gauge stripper. And then what we do, we'll come in here and we'll fan them out, right? And I'll come up here and fan these out. And then what do? I'll come here and merge them together. And when I get them merged together, I'll do what? Twist them. And then, of course, here we'll put them in our third hand. But like I said, I've used needle-nose pliers. I put a rubber band around the outside of a needle-nose pliers to put a spring on. And then we'll come in and still got some irritation here. First thing I'm going to do is come in here, I'm going to pick up my iron, I'm going to clean it off, right? Then I'm going to come over here and do what? In it. Then I'm going to come over here and put my soldering iron under here. I'm not okay. Thank you. And believe it or not, guys, most of these solder joints are going to be stronger than the wire. See where it broke at? Broke right where it went in the insulation. So what you end up with is you end up with a solder joint that's basically stronger than the wires themselves. So one of the things that I'll do, that's my test right there. If the soldering is done right, the solder joint will be stronger than the wire. So that's what I'm going to do when y'all bring them up here. I'm going to grab them and do what? I'm going to deliberately break them. Okay. Another method that they don't show, that he didn't show, is what we'll do is, y'all can see, guys, it's not easy to strip a wire if you use the right gauge. And this is another method that I like to use, and you'll end up with a joint that's stronger than the wire itself. is what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and pre-pin the wire. So I ought to record this. Oops. I'm going to take my other wire and pin it. By the way, you don't want to get the alligator clips too close like I just did, because when the wire gets kind of warm, it'll leave teeth marks in it. So anything. So what we do is once we strip it, we'll come up here and twist it with our clean hands, right? Pick it up, clean the iron on my sponge, or if we do have brass too. That's I should have my safety glass on. But I was trying to solder with my soldered wire. So safety glasses off, guys. I'm sorry. So y'all didn't see what I did. I picked up my wire that I had soldered, and I was trying to solder. I was trying to solder with wire. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and take this, and I'm just going to come up here and make a hook in this side. Then I'm going to come up here and make a hook in this side. Then I'm going to do what? I just hook them together, and then I'm going to cinch them down. So I like this method too. And then I'll come up here and walk. And I'll come up and just solder them. So I call this the hook method. I don't want to leave any corner. The test would be to what? Pull it apart. I can't break that. So, and what you end up with, so this is a real good joint. Makes a pretty small radius. So I call that the hook method. And like he said, he didn't cover that in his video. You know.
There's more out there.
Now what we're going to do.
I like it.
To me, that's one of the simpler methods to do it, but here you have to tin the wire. You can solder solid strand wire too, and that's a really good. What you're trying to end up with, if I've got something that, especially wires that I can't get to, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder. Or that's under tension too. We have all different types of methods that you see that we use in house wire. What's nice about, of course, what advantage does solid strand have over strand? Yeah, it's easier to terminate and splice. So what I would do, what I could do with this, and I would end up with a really good joint, guys, is I would just strip it. I need to strip it a little more. I don't have the right gauge for this wire. This is a pretty small insulation on this. So what I'm doing, I'm compensating for it, is I'm turning my stripper at a little bit of an angle. What we can do with solid wire is we can come up here and we can just twist it together like that. And that's a really good electrical connection. But the problem is what? Yeah, the problem is that it'll pull apart. So now my splice is less. Now what we'll do in electrical is we'll come in, and when we get there is we'll put what we call a wire nut on top of it, which adds a bunch of physical strength to the splice. But what's nice about this stuff is that I can come in and I can do things with this that I can't do with stranded wire. So I can wrap this under a screw. I can strip off the insulation and wrap it under a screw and tighten down the screw. Right? You understand? If I did that with stranded wire, what I would do, I still do that, but what I do first? I would tin it first. And then put a hook in it and put it down. So the advantage of solid wire is that it's easier to splice and it's easier to terminate. We can terminate and splice this with very, very simply. Stranded wire is harder to terminate and it's harder to splice. The big advantage of stranded wire is that it's what? Yeah, it's really flexible. So anything that's going to have a lot of motion in it, it's going to move around. Solids don't like to be vibrated and moved. You know, they'll break. So that's why we use a lot of stranded wire. If it's going to be under a lot of stress, it's not as easy to change the gauge, to stretch it out, because it'll give. It's got flexibility in it. So anything that's going to be in a lot of stress, we use a lot of stranded wire, or anything where we're going to get that flexibility. Stranded wire, of course, is harder to make, so for the same gauge of wire, stranded wire will cost more than solid wire. Solid wire is really easy to make. They just start off with a big copper rod, and they start pulling it through these dies and just reduce the gauge down to whatever they want it to. Stranded wire, you start off with the same technique, and then you have some machine. You ever see those machines that wrap them, that actually puts that twist in them? They're really, really cool. I wish I can have that. Where I'll see if I can find a video where they make these stranded cables that are already in a twist. Because they'll start off with a straight wire and then they twist everybody else around it. And those machines are really cool. Yeah, you see them go back and they pull the wire down through the center, and then you've got these things spinning. They're literally spinning while they come down. And each one of them putting a different strand on there, and it's really, really neat how they make those twisted stranded wire. And the bigger the conductor, the more likely they're going to go into a twist. The smaller the stranded conductor, the smaller the gauge of the stranded conductor, more likely they're just going to pull those strands straight through. But you imagine how it is to stretch these things out, and these guys start off with a solid steel or a solid bar, and then they just pull it through dies. They call it hard drawn until they get it down into these gauges right here. Which is really, really interesting. Yeah, break down. We'll finish this up. I think we're almost through with this lecture. Yeah, go ahead and take a break. Let me look. Almost. There, and we're going to pre-tin it so it don't bird cage on us if it's stranded, right? We stick it through the hole and we solder it that way. The other ways that you'll terminate it was with different types of connectors. So this is what we call a turret terminal. And what that happened is the turret terminal, guys, I had one when I came over here, but it's rolled up. I've just seen it myself. No, that's not turret. That's what we call bifurcated. Let me go get it. So this is called a turret. Flat insulation must be within 2 wire diameters, right? Cut off excess. Everybody okay? You got those pair of diagonal cutters and you cut off whatever you want to. You got to have a minimum of what? 180. A maximum of not 360 because 360 would overlap. Shall not do what? Shall not overlap. Minimum of 180, shall not overlap. And that's pretty standard. Clean the surface. We're not going to do that. Then we're going to go ahead and pre-tin the wire. We're going to go ahead and put it in a hook. We're going to come up here using our needle nose pliers to cinch it down, right? Then we're going. That's what they're showing. Gently tighten with needle nose pliers. Do not damage the conductor. We're going to make sure it's wrapping and up against this post. We don't want any wire. We don't want any of our wires sticking out like that, right? Everybody understand that? So we want this to be touching the post. Place one conductor on bottom, then we can go up like this. Usually, if you do multiple diameters, you put your biggest one on the bottom and move up toward your smaller. Select the right tip, make sure you cover, clean it up, re-tin, place the iron. Place the iron on the joint to be soldered using as much surface area as possible. Now you might have to do this. This is what we're talking. We can touch the solder at the joint between the conductor and the terminal to get the solder to flow, right? You understand? And then what do? Move it over to the other side. We end up soldering on the side opposite of the heat. Everybody understand that? And you want your soldering iron to touch everybody. Remove solder from the iron. First of all, we remove the solder first and then the iron. Anybody know why? Ask me if this has ever happened to me. Yes, a lot. Well, the problem is the solder, when it cools down, there's no plastic to it. It goes from a liquid to a solid. Then you end up with your solder stuck in there, and then you got to come back and reheat it anyway. So what we do is we remove remove the solder first and then the iron. Everybody okay? We do have flux, by the way, but we don't have brushes. This is flux. Now, normally we don't have to do that. This is flux. But I thought I stuck more than that in there. Might still be in the bag. This is what flux looks like. It's real sticky. So sometimes, a lot of people, I don't usually do this though, is we have what we call flux remover. And it's a spray that you spray on to remove the flux. Now the problem with leaving the flux on there, it is inert, which means it becomes non-conductive. It's non-conductive and it's non-corrosive when it's cooled down. The problem is that it's very sticky. So this is flux. So this is actually what's inside the solid. Huh? Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is flux paste right here. So this is rosin flux. You can see it's like very sticky. Well, what happens when it cools off? It's sticky, and now that means stuff is going to stick to it, right? So what I don't know if we'll do in this class. I'll show y'all that, but we have flux removal spray that you spray on just to remove the flux, and then we usually use a small paintbrush to paint it on there. You're just closest, James, to you. So a lot of times, if we got an iron that don't want to tin, then what we'll do is we'll put it down inside that flux to help break off the slag and stuff off the iron. So these are some examples. Guys, I don't know if you can see this. This is not a really good picture. But this is minimum. This is ideal. So you can see the fillet, if I can go back to that. So notice you can still see the what? Still see the strands. You can see the fillet where you have the wetting right here. You can see the fillet here where you have the wetting right here. You can still see the conductor, right? But we don't want any gaps here. We don't want any gaps here. So that's the minimum and the maximum things that they're showing you. We don't want a bubble. So see this, what's happened, what's wrong with this one? Can y'all see it? You can't tell the wire. You can't see the wire. If you can't see the wire anymore, if you can't see the wetting, we take for granted that it's a bad joint because I don't know, right? If I can see the wetting, if I can see that fillet, if I can see the wetting, I know it's a good joint. So there's no guesswork to it. This is what we call a bifurcated terminal. That would be this guy right here, and I'm not going to demonstrate anymore because they're all basically the same as far as doing the soldering technique. So this is it right here. So it's got these different posts. So what we do is we wrap our eyes around the post, or these guys are hollow, so sometimes we can bring the conductor up through the bottom and then wrap it around here, right? What rows do you think we're going to have here? The wrap's got at least to be 180. No, cannot overlap, right? You understand. It needs to touch the base, or if it's another conductor, it needs to touch the other conductor. What else? And the insulation has to be within what? Two wire gauges. And so this is they're showing minimum of what? 2 wire diameters. I'm sorry, that's right. Am I saying that right? I'm saying that wrong. Maximum, it needs to be a maximum of 2 wire diameters. It can be smaller than that. We don't want the insulation to touch the solder. Everybody understand? Did I say that right a while ago? I hope I did. We don't, well, the other one is, so that would be, I guess that would both ways would be correct, right? I understand that. I guess. We can't say, so the other way is wrong. It's not a minimum 2, it's a maximum 2. Because I can have it closer. How close can I get it? Well, we don't want the insulation to touch the wall, the solder. That makes sense? Okay. And we want it to be within what? Within 2 wire gauges. So I think I did say that wrong a while ago. But did I correct myself? Y'all okay? So we don't want it to be 2. We want it to be within 2. Right? Y'all understand that? Prepare a pre-tin conductor. We're going to turn it into a hook. We're going to do not let it overlap, right? This, by the way, is not, this one is not, since we have this angle right here, this is 90 degrees. So this is a minimum of what? 90 degrees. Do not allow conductors to do what? Overlap. Clean the terminal. We're not going to have to do that. By the way, if you have a problem with the flux not cleaning off the thing, or if you see, so these guys, when they oxidize, they're going to have a gray coating to it, a real dark gray coating. And I need to go get some of our conductors and let y'all see those. It's been around a little while. And the problem is that if you see that gray coating on there, flux will not get it off. But you don't want to file it off. Because a lot of times these conductors are plated, already have a tin plating around them, and some of them actually have a solder rate. So when I come over and look at every one of these things, I'll notice that they have a silver picture to them, but they are copper. So normally what they'll do is to keep that copper from oxidizing, what they'll do is they'll go ahead and coat this with either a real thin coating of tin, or sometimes they actually do a real thin coating of copper. So the problem is, if I come up here and start scraping on this, is eventually what we're going to do is we're going to get down to the copper. I'm going to pass this around. So I did this on purpose. So what I've done is I've got rid of that protection off that. So the terminal itself is copper, but they've got a tin plating around it because tin has a real low oxidation rate too. Okay. So this is why you very seldom see solder oxidized, because it's got that tin ratio in there, right? Y'all understand. And if you come in here and you start filing that with a file to clean it off with, then what happens? Well, you get that. Now you're down to copper. And copper is going to do what if it's exposed to the atmosphere? It's going to oxidize, right? And what I like to talk about is the Statue of Liberty. A lot of people don't understand the Statue of Liberty is copper, but it don't look copper because it's what? Oxidized. By the way, when they rebuild it, they deliberately they sprayed seawater up on there to deliberately makes it oxidize so it would look like it did before. It'd have been beautiful. It would have. It'd been all copper out there. So that means we don't want to get a file and clean that off. So what we do is, we used to call them pink pearls. The white erasers are not really good. The white erasers don't have enough abrasion on them, the real soft erasers. But the old pink erasers, those things work great on getting off oxidation. So, like I've got one at home. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got one here. We got a bunch of pencils here. So normally what we do is we get those pink erasers and clean those off. Those are abrasive enough to get rid of the oxidation, and they don't strip off the plating. But you see how easy that was? All I did was just took my, and I'm laughing. We had a guy. We finally talked him out of getting out of electronics. He couldn't, for some reason, he couldn't figure out how to wire a circuit up. Couldn't figure out how to do it. He couldn't do it. He couldn't breadboard a circuit. Just could not do it. He hooked those things up so many different times. I'd go over and say, Eddie, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. He'd redo it. Eddie, that's not right. That's not right. He eventually wore the copper off the leads on our resistors.
I find that funny. You know?
Huh?
I find that funny.
So Eddie finally,
Poor Eddie.
his name was Eddie. That's how you remember people like that. He was one of those that refused to think he couldn't do anything. Smart as a whip, he could pass every test you would give him. He really had a photographic memory. I laugh about that too. I had one student tell me that. We gave the final exam, and this guy says, there was 3 questions that's never been on the test before. He says, I got a photographic memory. He said, I remember these things. So I pulled his test back up and I said, well, there's this one, there's that. And I told him, you must not have loaded your film that day. I remember him like that. Oh, we okay? Yeah. So he forgot to load his camera that day. 90 degrees minimum. You can do it further. It doesn't hurt to do it further, but this is a 90-degree minimum on the bifurcated, right? You understand? But you don't want to do what? You don't want to overlap. The insulation must be within 2 wire sizes or gauges. Flat against the base, conductor minimum of, and these are, by the way, this actually came from a thing that dealt with getting solder certified, being certified, but we never pursued that because it was just too expensive. But this is the book that they came out with. That's where most of these pictures came from. Multiple wires, you can see how you can do that. Pretty neat. Are we okay? Stack one, the wires should, if stacked, the wires should be placed bottom to top according to size. So that means your biggest gauge wire will be on the bottom and you'd go up. Start off, first thing we're going to do is what? Clean your iron, re-tin the tip, come up here, notice the iron is touching both of them. You'll come in, you might have, this is not necessarily required, that's the way these people show it, is what they did is they come up here every time as they touch the iron between the junction, and then what do they do? To get the solder to flow, and then what do they do? Put over to the other side. Everybody okay? The solder forms a continuous fillet around the terminal. Remove the solder in the tip of the iron from the terminal. If you don't, eventually your solder is going to get stuck on there, guaranteed. Allow the connections to solidify and cool, which is not going to be hardly any time at all. I need to show y'all that video where the guy does everything wrong. No. If he does, he's really... But he's soldering a thing on with a torch, a stud. He's soldering on with a torch. And he's up there just talking and saying, this is how you do it. And then he reaches down and does what? Grabs it. Oh, man. If required, remove the flux residue with the appropriate solvent. So we should be able to see the strands of wire right. We should be able to see the fillet. We should be able to see the wetting. By the way, another thing nice about this guy is you can actually come up through the wire. So can y'all see this one? Yeah, so they're coming up through the center. This would bring a wire over from the other side. These are some alternative methods that you can use. If the wire gauge is perfect, you can stick it in there like that, or you can leave it. Strain relief, everybody understands strain relief. Okay there? Of course, we're not going to have that problem here. This is minimum, this is perfect, this is maximum. Hook terminal, same thing. Here's a hook terminal. I've got one. We've got plenty of these guys. They're over there in the kit. I don't see a hook terminal, but the picture itself, I did bring one over. That might have been the tail over there. Same procedure. Hook it, right? Insulation clearance. Everybody okay there? Wrap it around, cinch it around, cut off excessive wire. This one has got to be at least what? 180, because this is round. No more shall not what? Overlap. Clean it if you need it. Pencil razor may be used. If required, clean terminal with approved solvent. Are we okay? We're not going to have to do that on any of ours, I don't think. Prepare the wire. Cinch it down. We're going to tin the wire first, right? Everybody okay? Cinch it down. Room should be left for additional wires. So if you got one, put it in the center, and that way you can put different other wires on there. Here's showing 2 wires that's wrapped around there. Conductor shell provides strain relief. Conductor shell have a slight loop in to provide at least one. Our rule of thumb was 2 repairs. Try to leave enough stack for 2 repairs. And this would peeve you off, man. You got out there and you had a wire that broke at your terminal, and they ran just enough wire to get you there. Well, then what you had to do is you had to splice another conductor. So you spent all this time. So instead of just stripping it and soldering it on there, you literally had to get a wire. You had to splice it. You had to re-insulate it with heat shrink and that kind of stuff. It was done, but it just took what? More time. So is a soldering iron tip where you can cover both metals, clean it, place it on there, and then always end up soldering where? On the opposite side. Everybody okay? Because I think that's in the test. Allows solder junction to cool to room temperature. First you're going to do what? I don't know about that one. I would think it would be, we need to see the wetting as much as the wire is in contact, right? So minimum, optimal, and too much. Pierce terminals, we have a bunch of these. So these are basically the same technique. Since this has a flat surface, it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't I know it's the clearance, everybody okay? So every one of them, the minimum clearance, the maximum clearance is what? 2 wire gauges. So we want it within 2 wire gauges, no overlap at least. Since we have this edge right here to help hold the wire, notice on these we can have a minimum of what? 90 degrees wrap, no overlap, right? Huh?
2 wire gauges kind of wrong because what wire that gauge is 2 wire diameter.
Yeah, whichever one you're using. So that means the smaller the gauge wire, the closer you got to get, right? So we're okay on that one. So this will be one that we're going to do. And cup. These are cup. What we do is we run into these in these terminals. So this is the best method. You have these crimp-on terminals, which are okay sometimes, but they don't do real good. So this is a type of connector we call a DB9. And why is it called? So a D-type connector, the female. So connectors have a gender, and it's not really sexist, even though it works out to kind of sound that way. But you know, this is the terminology of the trade. So this would be the male connector. And then the female connector that plugs into this would be, it would have, I'm sorry, this is the did I say male? This is the female connector. The pins that plug into this would be male connector. So this would be the female connector. And notice this is a, what we call a Murphy move connector. Murphy's law says anything, well, it's longer, but what we say, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So if we don't put some method to prevent this connector from going on there, it's like IBM, when they originally came out with the mouse, the original serial interface was a 25-pin connector. Well, and that was set up for 2 complete channels worth of communication. Well, for the mouse, we wasn't using we didn't need all 24 pins. So IBM originally went back to this DB9. So this became pretty much, well, the standard for what we call our COM ports or our serial port at the time, the DB9 connector. And the mouse and the keyboard used this connector for years. When IBM came out with what they call their PS2 computer, they wanted to start making them smaller and smaller. So what they did is that they came out with a little DIN connector, it was I think it was a 5-pin connector. Well, the problem is that they didn't make the connector for the keyboard different than the connector for the mouse. So what could you do? It wouldn't hurt anything. You could plug the keyboard into the mouse connector and it won't work, or vice versa. So what they started doing is they started color coding them. So I think purple is the keyboard and I think green is the mouse or something like that. And then on the back of the motherboard, that's the way they do those connectors. Of course, where everything's going to now is USB, right? Yeah. So notice this is a cup connector. This is a cup right here. If my camera opens. So what we're going to do is we're going to terminate our conductors into these little old tiny cups. And there's a technique to doing this, and the problem is this is where your insulation is really, really important, because notice your pins are so close together that if you leave any exposed wire and they cinch these things down, then I'll put it inside a back shell. So the back shell's got 2 functions. It's going to protect your insulation, but then it's also going to put strain relief. So it'll come in and it'll actually cinch down onto the jacket of the cable. And that way, if something happens and you jerk on it, odds are you're not going to tear your wires out of here. Of course, y'all know y'all not supposed to jerk on. I know y'all not supposed to pull cords out by the cord. You're supposed to pull it out by the actual connector itself, right? How many people y'all see pull it out? Cords on the wall outlets and stuff like that. So this is the procedure for doing these. And so let's look at the actual procedure. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to come in here and we're going to, oops, this guy won't let me. Yeah. Let me make sure I don't already have it opened up for one thing. Right there. So notice the cup, and of course the biggest problem people have is they use too much solder. So what we're going to do is this would be the connector, and so what we're going to do is we're going to do it this way. We're going to come in and we're going to maintain this this clearance, right? And guys, we want this to be really close. What we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to not fill the cup up, probably. Maybe until, if I can find my mouse. Let's see if this doesn't work. Yeah, it works. So what we do is what I usually do is I come up here and I fill the cup up to the very bottom of the rim right there. So it's got solder in it. And then what I do is I tin my wire. So my wire is tinned. Okay, you understand Then what we do is we come over here, and very little tin, so we want to make sure our iron is clear. We don't want a big glob of solder, because what happens if we have a big glob, we put too much tinning on our iron, what's going to happen, we'll end up with a blob of solder on the opposite side. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here, and we're going to put our solder, we'll come up here and we'll put our soldering iron on this side right here. I'm sorry, we'll come over here and we'll put our soldering iron on this side over here. And you can tell when the solder liquefies, it'll liquefy. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our pre-tinned wire and we're going to stick it down into that liquefied solder. Now what's going to happen now is this liquid solder, this guy is going to heat up instantly, right? You understand? Then what we're going to do is we're going to push it all the way down to the bottoms out. So what you need to do before you tin the wire, well, you can go ahead and tin it, but you're going to pre-set it, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to come up here, you're going to take that thing, you're going to stick that wire down in that cup, and you're going to trim it, right? You understand? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get this insulation right here. I don't know why my mouse has stopped working. Is you want this insulation right here. You don't want it to touch, but you want it to be closer than 2 diameters. You want it to be real close. Because you got all these 9 wires, or this guy right here has got these 25 wires, and these wires are all right there together. If you leave too much if you leave too much bare wire up there, and then these things get pushed together, which is they're going to do when you put that cap on there, right, or that end boot, or whatever you put on there, it's going to push those wires together. Then what you do, once the wire is melted, once you get it down there, what you want to do is you want to pull it forward, and what that's going to do is make sure the solder flows in behind it, and then you're going to push it back. And then what you should see here, guys, is you should see this fillet right here, right? You understand? And then you should be able to see right up above the cap. You should be able to see the wire. The wire must be inserted to the bottom of the cup. Tilt the wire forward, then back while soldering. Solder shall fill at least 75% of the cup. Solder fillet must form between the wire and the terminals. Wire must have stress relief. Lengths of wire must be cut to allow for at least 1 repair. Insulation must be less than 2 wire diameters, but I like it closer than that. Are we okay? So that's the cup. This is not enough. This is just enough. This is too much. Are we okay? And then we're not going to look at printed circuit boards. Printed circuit boards would be for another class. So, because the name of this class is what? Cable splicing and class. So what we did is we looked at methods where we can do what? We can splice the conductor. We looked at methods where we could terminate the conductor using solder. Later on, we'll come in and we'll look at other methods we can terminate and splice without using solder. Are we okay? Okay. So let me run the lab off, guys, and let y'all start this lab.